Assalamualaikum. My name is Muhammad Najmi bin Muhammad Zaini, entry number 262689. I'm from group 7. So let me start. The spread of virus was rapidly throughout the world since 2019 outbreaks of coronavirus disease in early this years. Over 200 nations, which is more than 5 million people, have been affected. Several nations has announced strengthened public initiative, including lockdown and boundary close. This is important to restrict the flow of citizens, with purpose of monitoring the transmission of this virus. This is by contributed to the massive disturbance of worldwide economy.
For the idea and the issues. So for the Bangladesh, the effect of the COVID-19 response has been all too familiar for the slum and pavement dwellers of Bangladesh. As we know, Bangladesh is a very poor country, so it is currently 53.6 million people living in extreme poverty, including those forced into extreme poverty by the COVID-19. And that within last 47.3 million people are facing high economic risk. So by then, the consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic threatened to restore poverty to the country 15 years ago. Well, that is, Bangladesh is a very poor country. The poverty rate in Bangladesh in 2050 was 40%, compared to Singapore, which is only 29% within 2011. The country of 300 billion plus economy is precisely dependent on garments and textiles. As you can see here in the Bangladesh economic growth rate, contributing approximately 12% of its domestic gross product and 84% of its export. So, at the 6 months of the industry are being damaged by this pandemic with unimaginable tiny scales, work cards, and a failure of the entrepreneur's shoulder. It is necessary to understand the size of the problem to ensure that assistance is delivered securely. Mainly when it comes to COVID-19's reaction, law enforcement is obligated to protect the poorest and to help them access aid for the COVID-19. In Singapore, the economic recession sadly raises similarly serious problem as the poverty in their country, which is in economic problem, there is a little indication that low-income workers and other disadvantaged communities are having disproportionate effect. Furthermore, those on the front lines also have to be present for a role physically, like they need to go to their work, like the position on the market of or hourly pay is simply impractical to do remotely, such as janitors, security officers, and retail workers that they need to go to their work. By then, 24 million fewer people in Southeast Asia, which is included Singapore this year, will flee poverty. In comparison, 11 million more people will be left poorer and survive at US 5.5 or less a day in the worst cost situation. So a number of people have lost their job as a result of dramatic actions such as national lockdowns to suppress the outbreak. As of June, as of 22nd June, more than 132 million people nation member state had been sick, which is actually due to this COVID-19. We can see that mostly of these people have to quit their job, don't have money, and sometimes they didn't have a food to eat. So in Singapore, compared to Bangladesh, Singapore is actually better than Bangladesh because they're actually a rich country, which is mostly of their poor, poor people is actually foreign, such as Malay or Indian in there. By then, compared to Singapore and Bangladesh, we know that actually Singapore has a better community than Bangladesh, which is actually Singapore have a really small scope of person in there. but Bangladesh they actually have more people living there, so that's why Bangladesh is actually a very poor country. Uh, uh, depend on their country mostly rather than Singapore.
Since we can see, Bangladesh did some have a strict policies and procedure for the beginning phase. Millions of people as a Dhaka, a city with 46,000 fish populated area or a town, end up attacking to the street, have and not a good social distancing. From we know that WHO imply that we have a good social distancing to spread the COVID-19. But in Bangladesh, it's so hard to have it. Indeed, it's a double of staying at home is not successful. For example, Dhaka, one of the capital city, have a many people. They always move to safe and harmonious cities in Bangladesh. The threat for COVID-19 is hardly known to these people rural residents because most of them they have never been to school, have a ground with relatively a nearby district, and there is a homelessness. So they do not know have to know what is happened and not have a good educational facilities. Sometimes they have need to share the bottle soap and need to share to washroom and hardly to have a water supply. Bangladesh is many Rohingya people which based on institution of epidemiological disease control and research IDCR, after 5 weeks with a report of the first case was test only 11,230 people, counting for around 16 tests per million population. Because many hospitals still do not have enough protective equipment (PPE). The Central Control of COVID-19 Diagnostic Facility is quite possible to do. This made the majority of individuals and healthcare staff is unusually immunized states. However, as a side effect of the total estimate lack of PPE and diagnostic testing potential among the mass population, fear and anxiety will increase, and almost all the health workers has neglected to give people any service, which must comment from various industry. The country's health authority quickly agreed to raise their test number. There have become 17 laboratories from across country currently working on testing, probable and health care provider. There have been numerous cases of COVID-19 and few more other research labs set up in a various cities. Moreover, to help the economy, bank request to deal by the Ministry of Finance regulation on 6% and 9% cover on down payment and loan interest rate disadvantage asset equality fragile financial industry as well as the distress more credit market. As connectivity to funding source and bank loan become more cost, it's good enough to justify mentioning that private sector credit growth has already been decreasing since 2019. Meanwhile, government inflation is predicted to rise by 25.13%, according to the Bangladesh Institute of Development Study (BIDS). In other side, while textile factories were permitted to attempting for produce under the curfew, and average daily 1 million textile employees of each quarter of the states of the staff had to be cut off according to reduced export orders. But their Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has said the package of government stimulus expansion from for the urban area of Singapore, in terms of health conditions, Singapore had a good management in controlling the coronavirus pandemic so far. Their Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said in order to the government should have started to act more immediately and frequently to manage the speedy spreading in migrant workers' hotel. In responding for expanding numbers of new cases, a strict policy with preventing habits that the classified as a circuit breaker was declared by Singapore on 3 April to be applied from 7 April to May and be continued. The government recognized that rural life in the drum posed a risk of infections and increased precautions, which seemed adequate before it broke out and threatened to overwhelm to large cluster. Singapore has enlarged number of cases cured by public health system with raising the potential of its hospital and putting in place short-term of group and protection infrastructure. It was one of the first country that imposed restriction on anyone with a previous travel history from China and part of South Korea. For possibly infected patients, it has a strict hospital and home quarantine regimen thoroughly tracks anyone that may be in contact with the patient of COVID-19. Singapore has resolved this primarily through approved public health preparedness clinics. Patients of respiratory marks received in these treatment facilities. Government feel responsible and support of keep them rest at home to avoid for risk the others. In addition, Singapore Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Heng Swee Keat stated have around $8 billion Singapore to implement the coronavirus pandemic pressure economy to reduce what happened to economy in Singapore. The open and currency-dependent economy of one of the hardest hit in Asia were lockdown policies around the globe, pointed directly at speeding up to spread of the coronavirus. Besides, from the 7 months of profit expansion by March 2021, the cost of expenditure that companies might gain tend to plan reconstruction of various industry and additional 187 billion through Singapore dollars in support of the airlines industry transaction for Singaporeans that seeking work or those who have suffered laid off and low wage workers. Even so, new method introduced from government also provide 100 billion in tourist industry payment from Singapore to support domestic tourist industry for Singaporeans.
Okay, moving into my part is recommendation and suggestion. As for Bangladesh is not new to disasters or major humanitarian crises. Sitting astride a river delta at the bottom of the Himalayan range, the country is fighting a long-standing battles against the impact of climate change and currently hosts the world's largest refugee camp along its southern border. The COVID-19 pandemic, however, is a crisis of completely different magnitude and one that will require a response of unprecedented scale. Bangladesh leaders in the public and private sector must come together to respond to the immediate threat to health system and the long-term effect to the country's economy. For the first recommendation are to increasing female participation in the labour force and boosting private investment are currently prioritized to maximize growth and help realize the country's goal of becoming middle-income country. To be in the comfort zone of the middle income by 2021, Bangladesh needs to rise to 7.5 into 8% by creating more and better jobs. Next, increasing efficient growth by accelerating the shift from agriculture to higher productivity manufacturing and service through learning from the experience of countries and firms with higher productivity and increasing outward orientation by deepening and diversifying labor-intensive export, meaning that to improvising and adding more industrial sector to help country grow. Bangladesh government will also need to explore options on how to increase revenues in order to finance upgrade for infrastructure while maintaining the social safety net. Not to say the country is further grappling with Rohingya refugee crisis. Finally, the fight against COVID-19 cannot be carried out by the government alone. It will require an unprecedented level of coordination between the public and private at the local and international level. Okay, now we go to Singapore. Okay, as for Singapore, there has highly developed and successful free market economy and has made the most of its limited natural and human resources. It has enjoyed a remarkably open and corruption-free environment, stable price, and a per capita GDP higher than that of most developed countries. Its economy depends heavily on exports, particularly in consumer electronics, information technology products, pharmaceuticals, and on a growing financial service sector. First, there is some room for improvement and in particular scope for Singapore to become an innovation hub, improving its business dynamism and developing skills like critical thinking to prepare its workforce for the world of tomorrow. Secondly, the most important is the company have to stay agile and capitalize the opportunity to transform their pieces and also to train the workers with a new technology. Latest Labour report, the Manpower Minister raised the issue of workers not having the right skill for some jobs, and this job mismatch is seen across different sectors in the October macroeconomic review by Singapore Central Bank. Next, Monetary Authority of Singapore has announced a $125 million support package for the financial and fintech sector to sustain and strengthen capabilities. This will position financial institutions and fintech firms for stronger growth when the threat of COVID-19 recedes and economic activity normalizes. Besides that, business leaders will need to evolve and adapt their human resource strategies to ensure that their staff adjust well to this change and remain engaged in their work. Last but not least, government must focusing on preserving and creating jobs in industries with good growth prospects. One of the biggest challenges facing governments in the coming years is anticipating shift in the labour market over a 5 to 10-year horizon that could come from advancement in technology or changes in the global environment. Then the government have to prepare their people to transition into those new jobs. Moving to the next presenter.
In conclusion, the weaker outlook of Singapore external demand and the expected economy that impact the domestic measures taken to contain the spread of COVID-19. Although the COVID-19 outbreaks is expected to adversely affect most sectors, but there are some bright spots in the economy, including the new opportunities that have come with the rise in demand for online sales and services. Domestically, the performance of Singapore economy in the remaining quarters of the year also will depend, because as they live in the circuit breaker period. The bright side of economy situation in the government of Bangladesh, because they are proactively introduce a stimulus plan that will boost the RMG companies, provide which the direct benefits strengthen the financial system and also maintain economy liquidity. The commitment of the government of Bangladesh to ensure the quarantine time when the official statistics for COVID-19 affected are still lower than relative to the other countries. There is a potential for revival of the economy by Q4 of 2020. Of course, it is much depending on the RMG and manpower importing to rebound from economic shock and slowing down the infection rates in Bangladesh. That's all from us. Thank you.